Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. And today, after multiple requests, we're going to try to discuss Urantia. This will be a brief summary of Urantia, but also a discussion of its validity and what it is and what I think about it. I remember when I was in college in deep search mode, trying to find the answers of the universe, just constantly reading all the time. I remember the day I was in Kansas. I went into a Barnes & Noble and I was walking among the stacks, and this gigantic book, Urantia, was there. And at the time, and I still am, a huge science fiction fan. And the one thing I can tell you about Urantia, even if it's completely 100% false, it is a magnificent piece of science fiction. One of the greatest science fiction books. If it is false, it is one of the greatest science fiction books with so much detail, so much to it. And then after I've done several episodes on the Law of One, I've started to ask myself, does Urantia fit within the world of the Law of One? Are they contradictions? I have been on a couple podcasts where I've discussed Urantia with people, and I don't know. I've read all the pages of it, and I wanted to give you my best summary. So if you don't feel like reading Urantia or know anything about it, let me tell you a little bit about it. Urantia is a channeled work that appears to be very similarly channeled to the Law of One material. I've read everything that I could from different channelers talking about Urantia. That's the magnificent thing about this episode. We have Ra, we have Latui, we have Lima, 3 different channeled beings, and Abraham, all talking about Urantia. And there's a lot of different information about it. So I go back to that time. I just remember when I first saw that book and I read every single page of it. And if you've seen the book, it's a gigantic book, but I read it like a science fiction novel because it's telling you how the earth is created and how the whole universe works. So after a while, kind of part of me just said, it doesn't feel right. There's a little voice in me that said that it doesn't feel right. Some of the wording is so crazy and so spot on, but perhaps it was just them trying to translate these words into English in the best format that they could. And I don't know, some of the words are too spot on. You have classic biblical characters in Urantia like Lucifer, and Melchizedek makes an appearance. Urantia talks about a lot of the same things that the Law of One does with different language, but it also is talking about a quarantine in the same way that we talk about the quarantine in the Quo episode and the Law of One episode. So I went back to it to try to see if it fit within the Law of One. I wanted to see if it was a contradiction or if there were some similarities in the things discussed by Ra in the Law of One in Urantia. The Urantia Book, or the Urantia Papers, or the Fifth Epochal Revelation, is a spiritual, philosophical, and religious book that originated in Chicago sometime between 1924 and 1955. The authorship remains a matter of speculation. It has received various degrees of interest ranging from praise to criticism for its religious and scientific content, its unusual length, and its lack of a known author. The text introduces the word Urantia as the name of the planet Earth, and states that its intent is to present enlarged concepts and advanced truth. The book aims to unite religion, science, and philosophy, and its enormous amount of material about science is unique among literature claimed to be presented by celestial beings. Among other topics, the book discussion of the origin of the meaning of life and mankind's place in the universe, and the relationship between God and the people in the life of Jesus. The exact circumstances of the origin of the Urantia Book are unknown, The book and its publishers do not name a human author. Instead, it is written as if directly presented by numerous celestial beings appointed to the task of providing epochal religious revelation. As early as 1911, William S. Sadler and his wife Lena Sadler, physicians in Chicago and well known in the community, are said to have been approached by a neighbor who was concerned because she would occasionally find her husband in a deep sleep and breathing abnormally. She reported she was unable to awake him at these times. The Sadlers came to observe the episodes, and over time, the individual produced verbal communications that claimed to be from student visitors' spiritual beings. This changed sometime in early 1925 with a voluminous handwritten account, which from then on became a regular method of purported communication. The individual was never identified publicly, but has been described as a hard-boiled businessman, member of the Board of Trade and Stock Exchange. The Sadlers were both respected physicians, and William Sadler was a sometime debunker of paranormal claims. In 1929, he published a book called The Mind at Mischief, in which he explained the fraudulent methods of mediums and how self-deception leads to psychic claims. He wrote in an appendix there were 2 cases that he had not explained to his satisfaction. The other exception has to do with a rather peculiar case of psychic phenomenon, one which I find myself unable to classify. I was brought in contact with it in the summer of 1911, and I've had it under my observation more or less ever since, having been present at probably 250 of the night sessions, many of which have been attended by a stenographer who made voluminous notes. A thorough study of this case has convinced me that it is not of the ordinary trance. This man is utterly unconscious, wholly oblivious to what takes place, and unless told about it subsequently never knows that he has been used as a sort of clearinghouse for the coming and going of alleged extraplanetary personalities. Psychoanalysis, hypnotism, intensive comparison fail to show the written or spoken messages of this individual have origin in his mind. Much of the material secured through this subject is quite contrary to his habits of thought, to the way in which he has been taught, and to his entire philosophy. In fact, of much that we have secured, we have failed to find anything of its nature in existence. In 1923, a group of Sadler's friends, former patients and colleagues, began meeting for Sunday philosophical and religious discussions, but became interested in the strange communications when Sadler mentioned the case at their 4th meeting and read samples at their request. Shortly afterwards, a communication reportedly was received about which this group would be allowed to devise questions, and that answers could be given by celestial beings through the contact personality. Sadler presented this development to the group, and they generated hundreds of questions without full seriousness. But their claim is that it resulted in the appearance of answers in the form of fully written papers. They became more impressed with the quality of the answers and continued to ask questions until all papers, now collected together as the Urantia Book, were obtained. The group was known as the Forum and was formalized as a closed group of 30 members in 1925 who pledged not to discuss the material with others. Over time, some participants left and others joined, leading to a total membership of 486 people over the years, from diverse backgrounds and a mix of interest levels. A smaller group of 5 individuals, called the Contact Commission, including the Sadlers, was responsible for gathering the questions from the forum, acting as the custodians of the handwritten manuscripts that were presented as answers and arranging for proofreading and typing of the material. Bill Sadler Jr. is noted to have composed the table of contents that is published with the book. The Sadlers and others involved, now all deceased, claimed that the papers of the book were physically materialized from 1925 until 1935 in a way that was not understood even by them, with the first 2 parts being completed in 1934 and the third and fourth in 1935. The last forum gathering in 1942. The communications purportedly continued for another 2 decades while members of the forum studied the book in depth, and according to Sadler and others, permission to publish was given to them in 1955. To give you an overview, the Urantia book is approximately 2,000 pages long and consists of a body of 196 papers, divided in 4 parts and an introductory foreword, talking about the central and super universes and local universes and the nature of God. It talks about Jesus, and it explains who Jesus is and what exactly happened to him during that time that's not covered in the Bible. Some of the wording is so crazy that when you read it, it sounds like a science fiction book. So I really got to thinking about whether it was valid in my mind, because the story behind it gives you some idea of its authenticity on some level. So I wanted to know what it was, and I think that the same question is being asked. Now, in the Law of One, they ask Ra, the Urantia book, which I haven't read, who gave that? Ra says, I am Ra. This was given by a series of discarnate entities of your own earth planes, the so-called inner planes. This material is not passed by the council. Of course, people are going to say that this is the devil, that people are trying to lead you astray from the Bible, that it's clearly these are demons. Of course, you're going to hear that. So I wanted to see more what people have discussed when it comes to the Law of One. So there was an interview with Jim McCarty, and the interviewer asks, how do you compare the raw material to, say, the Urantia material? And McCarty says, Urantia was apparently put together by entities from the inner earth planes. These were not ETs, these were ascended masters who had been able to achieve a certain level of realization that allowed them to retire to the inner planes and try to come up with a book that might be helpful to those entities who had similar interests. The Urantia book is a tome that has all kinds of helpful information, but you have to really dig in there. A lot of people have said the same thing about the raw materials as not being easily understood. But I think for any person who has that type of desire and is on that wavelength, then the Urantia would make sense, or the raw materials would make sense, or whatever you're interested in will make sense to you. When a questioner asked Abraham, is the Urantia true? Abraham, of course, does not say it's true or not, but refers to us as the ones that gave this and how different many of the channelings are, and that to treat any channeling for the purpose of the people that they were talking to at the time. And sometimes the information is given differently, and that it would never be good for her to say it wasn't true, which is a similar theme by a lot of these entities. The question is that I didn't really think through is that Ra is saying it wasn't passed by the council, which means that Ra may think that Urantia is true, but because it's not approved by the council, Ra can't say anything about it. Ra can only say what's been approved by the council. So Urantia might be off limits. So some ascended masters may have got some information they shouldn't have. So in another channeling, in another session outside of the Law of One sessions, they were channeling Latwii, and they asked, yes, that reminds me of the Urantia book. Would you comment on the validity of the book? And Latwii says, I am Latwii, and I am aware of your query, my sister. This book, which your peoples call the Urantia book, was compiled by entities existing within the so-called inner planes of your planet. These entities sought to be of service by explaining in their terms, yet using some veiling of explanation, the nature of creation and the nature of evolution upon this planet. These entities sought to be of this service in a response to a call of the third density entities of your planet many of your years in the past. As with all answers to those who call, the information offered is stated in such a way as to speak only to those who call. Therefore, the information might be seen to be of limited use, as is any information communicated in this manner, including the information which we have to offer, which is exactly what Abraham says in her channeling when she was asked that, which to me is a cop-out. They're saying they can't answer it, or they shouldn't. That's fine. In another question, when they were channeling Lima, they asked, I have one more question. Jim McCarty asked, is the Urantia book familiar to you? And if so, is it of a valid nature in your opinion? And Lima says, I am Lima, and we are indeed familiar with this writing of which you speak. But we again do not desire to influence one's free will in an undue manner by seeming to judge the value of any work. For there are many who would find great value in this work and many who would find less value. The value is a function of not only the work, but the one to whom the work is made available and the needs of that particular entity at that particular point in its evolution. May we answer further? And they say that seems like it would hold true of many other written things that we have, such as the Bible and general written material. Is that true? And Lima says this is correct. So in another question, they said about the Urantia portrayal of the universe, the physical universes, does that seem to be something that you would put your yes, this seems like a reasonable approach, or it seems like an interesting approach to me anyway? Lima says, and without risking infringement, my brother, we may suggest there are many, many points of view of the infinite creation, which each contribute a portion of truth and a portion of distortion. For these entities, such as yourself and all which exist within this infinite creation, are unique in their ability to experience, to formulate concepts, and to move forward in thinking from those concepts. And thus there is a great variety of points or places from which to view the one creation of the one Creator. Each is true and each is false, for that which is the one creation is beyond all definite description, and yet each description reveals a portion of that which is. So I would agree with Lima, and I would agree with Latwii and Abraham and Ra, but I would still say I want to know how accurate this is to the present, current, actual situation in our universe. You could answer that, because it's literally saying which planets are controlled by whom, giving a structure of the government of the universe. And I don't know how far we're going to go down that rabbit hole during this episode. But to give you a summary again, it is broken into 4 parts devoted to the central and super universes. The local universe, the history of Urantia, their name for this planet, and the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. The Urantia book takes a little getting into, since its language is dense and somewhat archaic. But if you stay with it, you may find, as I did, that the pages resonate with the authentic voices of an altogether different intelligence. Those who may be cautious of embarking on its over 2,000 weighty pages, but those whose intuition leads them to explore the deeper currents of life, are recommended to make up their own minds. That's what Abraham says. You must make up your own mind for everything. Don't ask somebody else, is this correct or not? About anything, you must make up your own mind, and make up your own mind as to the authenticity of the narrative. Until that time, I can only assure you that in the many years that I've been exploring the book and applying its revealed wisdom to my life, I have not yet found anything but what it claims to be in most cases. My attention was drawn to the midwayers, which are described in the book as the small group of beings that the Urantia book tells us have a primary concern with material life on this planet. They are invisible to the human eye, yet can manifest in this physical reality when a situation is significant enough to require their help. Indeed, midwayers feel very responsible for all of life on the planet. The midwayers came into being over 500,000 years ago when our planetary prince, according to the book, Caligastia, and his deputy prince, Dalagastia, together with a staff of 100 off-planet supermortal volunteers, came to Earth on a specific mission to uplift humanity and start the civilizing process. The supermortal volunteers, who were effectively immortal at that stage, began mating with each other to produce over time the 50,000 of these angels we called midwayers, who then became invaluable assistants to Prince Caligastia. It is due to their off-planet genetics that midwayers possess their rather unusual attributes. They are immortal and are normally imperceptible to human senses, and yet can manifest and affect physical reality. They say their interventions are relatively infrequent and demand considerable energy from a number of them remaining in their dimension to facilitate the appearance of one of them in this dimension. Eons of time passed. Then roughly 250,000 years ago, the high angel Lucifer was appointed system sovereign of our system, and in this capacity he was responsible for overseeing the welfare of the evolution of the mortals in our system of 1,000 planets. More time passed, but all was not well. Lucifer apparently was not happy with how he was being permitted to rule, with the result being roughly 203,000 years ago, Lucifer and his assistant Satan in the book fomented a revolution with Lucifer leading the charge. Now, I'm not saying that Lucifer or Satan are real. I'm saying that was the name of these citizens that ran literally a big chunk of the universe. Perhaps deep down subconsciously we know these names because of this. Or possibly when they were channeling these entities, they used those names as a translation. So according to the Urantia Book, Lucifer and Satan, Lucifer's main assistant, came to believe that an elaborate conspiracy had been concocted by the creator sons of the local universes to promote the existence of a fictitious, unseen divinity, which the creator sons then used as a control device to manipulate the orders of celestials and angels within their creations. Now, I'll see if I can talk about the creator sons. There's just so many things that there's no way that I can define it all. If I just read the definition of terms, I could spend an entire podcast of 2 hours. And that's the problem. It's so dense, people just pretty much turn it down. Having announced the existence of this conspiracy, Lucifer demanded more autonomy for all beings and for system sovereigns and planetary princes to follow their own approaches for accelerating the spiritual development of their mortal charges. The revolutionaries quickly gained followers, and the rebellion spread rapidly to affect 37 planets in this system, with Urantia, our planet Earth, being one of them. So are all these aliens that we're interacting with as starseeds a part of this little group of 37 planets that have been kind of cordoned off from the rest of the universe? Is that where you hear about the Orions and the Pleiades? Are we a part of some grouping of planets, and that's why these other planets are so concerned about us? Who knows? As well as 37 pairs of administrative angels, the planetary princes and their assistants were responsible for the orderly progression of mortal beings on their worlds, and the revolution was effectively suppressed by the administration authorities and recast as a heinous rebellion, its immediate consequence being the removal of Lucifer and Satan from their posts in the system. Yet paradoxically, the 37 planetary administrations who had aligned with the rebel faction were turned over to the planetary princes of those worlds to apply the Lucifer doctrine. So in a way, Lucifer got what he wanted, with one disastrous and possibly unanticipated exception. Presumably, to prevent the rebellion from spreading, our entire system of planets, including the 37 worlds falling to Lucifer, were isolated and quarantined, essentially cutting us off from the rest of the multiverse affairs. Now, the contradiction for this is in the law of one material. They indicate the reason that we are in a quarantine is because other planets in our system have destroyed themselves, and in order to help with the development of our planet. Both of them could be true. And oftentimes I have this thought that all of the thoughts could be true. All of the different theories could be true. I've been reading the Emerald Tablets by Thoth, and those contradict the Great Pyramid stuff in the Law of One. But what if they all happened in parallel realities? And as we move into the future, these parallel realities mesh together. And so we all have different memories, and some of these realities are so powerful, they are so connected to our reality that we literally have multiple different multidimensional histories on our past, which makes it possible for you to take all of these and assemble them together. At the time of the Lucifer rebellion, the vast majority of the 50,000 midway angels on earth, over 40,000 of them in the book, aligned themselves with Lucifer and Satan, and they were destined to remain on our planet until the time of Christ, when according to the Urantia Book, it was one of Christ's occulted functions to remove them. It is a brief reference. No further details are given in the book as to where the rebel midwayers were taken. However, with the removal of these 40,119 rebel midwayers, a mere 9,881 loyal midwayers remained here to fulfill the tasks of 5 times their number, meaning they need more midwayers, they don't have them. And as a result of all of this, in contrast to a normal planet, one not quarantined, on which angelic companions and the presence of helpful midwayers and extraterrestrials must be commonplace knowledge, we earthlings have slumbered in our corner of a populated multiverse, unaware of who we are and how we got this way. Having been quarantined and isolated from normal extraterrestrial activity for the long 203,000 years since the rebellion, we first lost touch with and then forgot entirely our rightful place in the populated multiverse. Given this, we were bound to evolve as a troubled species. Our world is one of the few planets, if you believe this, that due to the Lucifer rebellion, have been thrown off their normal patterns of development. Now, it's interesting, in Melchizedek's book, The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, he describes the Lucifer rebellion as happening on Mars, in that Mars is raised differently, and the beings there basically had eliminated emotions. They were like Vulcans. But I guess this turns out to be a bad thing. When they are just logical, they war because they have no remorse, and they basically destroyed their planet because of that, and at one point came to Earth and infected our own growth pattern because of that. So he calls that the Lucifer rebellion, and then the Lucifer rebellion that's referred to in Urantia is different. So what I'm trying to do is say, is this either not true or could both be true? It is not my place to say. It's my place to think and maybe have a hunch on it, and it's your place to determine what that means as well. But we've been thrown off our normal patterns of development for a planet, and it's persisted over a long period of time, and we're in it, if it's true. And then, according to my understanding, in the Urantia community, in the early 1980s, the planetary quarantine was lifted, enabling the rest of the multiverse to make more legitimate contact with us, so that, of course, we start getting the raw materials in the 80s. And more recently, we were witnessing is the return of the rebel midway angels, who are now coming back to assist us in the coming transformation of our world. And as angels, midwayers are undying, which is why I think of them as true planetary citizens and existing in a frequency domain just the other side of the veil. They are, as implied earlier, invisible to the human eye, and yet under certain conditions are able to interact with our material reality. When they are created on a world, they remain on it as aides and guides and emergency workers until the planet is settled in light and life. This is their genesis and their true nature, but by the time that recorded history rolled around, the rebel midwayers were becoming a self-serving and cynical, caring for humans merely as playthings in their power games. It should also be noted that it was a response to a petition from the loyalist midwayers on this planet that the Urantia Book was assembled. By the end of the 19th century, although there was an upsurge of interest in psychism and spirituality all over the Western world, the midwayers realized that there was a desperate need for authentic and accurate cosmological, historical, and spiritual information. In fact, this massive infusion of spiritual knowledge is rightfully our heritage, which would have become embedded in the religious and social mores of the global population had it not been for the interruption created by the Lucifer rebellion. And when we examine the Bible in Genesis 6:1-4 and Numbers 13:32-33, we find a mention of the Nephilim. They appear again in detail in the book of Enoch, in which they are named as the fallen angels who mated with human females. Biblical scholars in general are undecided as to exactly who the Nephilim were. Were they a race of giants, as some suggest? Others believe they were the progeny of the descendants of Seth, mixing with those of Cain. One aspect appears to be fairly definitive. Unlike midwayers, the Nephilim were physical material beings. So these midwayers and Nephilim, they may have been the Egyptian gods and god kings because of their superior genetic heritage, who knows? But then our conversation turns to Melchizedek. Check out my episode on the mystery of Melchizedek. Although he only makes a brief appearance in the Bible as an ally of Abraham, the Urantia Book is far more forthcoming about this enigmatic priest. This is why I returned to the book, because Drunvalo Melchizedek keeps talking about the Melchizedek consciousness. And I was like, that was talked about so much in Urantia, so I had gone back to revisit it. And the communicants of the Urantia Book called him Makaventa Melchizedek, which is the same name given by Drunvalo Melchizedek as being the person that started the Melchizedek mystery schools. And according to them, according to Urantia, he was in fact a high angel, one of the Melchizedek Brotherhood, who are great teaching angels of the multiverse. He appeared outside the tent of a group of nomads around 1900 years before Christ, announcing that he was a servant of the Most High. Over the 94 years he spent in this incarnation, long before his material body had begun to disintegrate, the book coyly tells us his impact spread over the face of the globe. He created the most important teaching center of his era at Salem and sent missionaries and envoys all over the world. His specific mission, so we're told, was essentially to bring the experiential reality of one God to the planet as a preparation for the coming of the Christ, some 2,000 years later. There's a reference to Makaventa Melchizedek in the Dead Sea Scrolls, one that talks of him as divine being. Hebrews titled him El Elyon, and certain Gnostic teachings was the concept of the covenant. We know of this covenant and its suggested relationship with the rainbow mainly through a reference in the Bible, but the Urantia Book lays it out with a much starker reality. At a time when thoughts of divinity were invariably accompanied by fear, retribution, and animal or human sacrifice, the concept that an individual could be saved through faith alone was revolutionary. Agree to believe in God's promises and follow his instructions. So Makaventa Melchizedek told a startled Abraham, and God agrees to do everything else. The offer was apparently good for all time. This promise would be depicted in art and iconography down through the ages of the symbol of the rainbow, which represented God's covenant to humanity. Nobody had ever conceived of this idea of the covenant of faith before, and we are told that Abraham, when he was presented with it, found it as radical as anybody would, until he tested it out for himself. The antinomian idea of salvation through faith alone was almost too advanced for the times. However, the impact of its truth and simplicity, together with its implicit monotheism, was carried across the face of the civilized world by Makaventa Melchizedek's missionaries, thus paving the way for Christ Michael some 2 millennia later. According to the communicants of the book, the original creation is called the central universe. From this springs the material universes of time and space, which comprise 7 super universes and 4 outer space levels. As for the Creator itself, they tell us it consists of 3 aspects: the Father, the Mother, Son, and the Holy Spirit. It is not unlike the Christian Trinity, but with one significant feature that differs from the Trinity: the eternal Son. the second person of the Urantia Trinity, is actually two beings in one and is called the Mother Son. This identification was lost as Christianity in its early days became progressively more patriarchal. The three aspects of the Trinity reside in the central universe, while Creator Sons, the Michael Sons, are Jesus Christ, and their accompanying Mother Spirits, 700,000 of each, modulate the energy emanating from the central universe to create the matter, life forms that exist in each local universe. These Creator Sons are gods in their own right. They are not the creator gods of our souls, but as stated, they do modulate the building blocks of their local universes. Now, the reason I don't like the Urantia is that it separates God from you, because I believe we are God. So that's one reason I've never liked it. So, as well as creeping the realms of the celestials, they say, they create the conditions in which our souls can inhabit material vehicles. After we shuck off our physical bodies, we are given the opportunity to ascend through the many levels of the local universe to ultimately travel to the heart of the great central universe itself. Christ Michael, the Creator Son of our local universe of Nebadon, is, so we are told by the angels dictating the Urantia Book with their customary numerical precision numbered 611,121 in a master universe, currently sporting a total of 700,000 Creator Sons. There is one Creator Son per local universe. The multiverse is quite sizable affair when we remember that a single local universe is made up of 10 million inhabited planets. The Urantia Book also maintains that, as with Christ Michael, every Creator Son in each of the hundreds of thousands of local universes is required to incarnate on each of the 7 primary levels of his created domain, with the human incarnation being the final one, which means they have to go from insect to animal in all the different levels. The 7 different levels, which we talk about in the Law of One, are the same 7 levels of consciousness. There are many details of this that aren't relevant here, but I have no reason to doubt the book communicants when they emphasize the significance of Michael's incarnation as an event of vital interest to the rest of his observing local universe. Here we come back to the exceptional conditions we find on this planet. Under normal circumstances, in other local universes, there might be one or many magisterial missions. According to the book, as we know, each Creator Son rules over 10 million inhabited planets. However, he incarnates as a mortal only on one of these. Because of this, the magisterial sons represent the Creator Son on those 10 million worlds where the Creator Son does not incarnate. Our world has never seen a magisterial mission, but the communicants of the Urantia Book believe it could be any day now. What do we know about this magisterial son and his mission? Well, as the name suggests, the magisterial sons are the high magistrates of the inner realms, and they operate under the authority of the Creator Son and are drawn from an order of celestials called the Avenals, who hail from the central universe. Although a high celestial being, the magisterial son manifests as an adult human being, while the 70 Avenals, who accompany the mission and support him from the subtle energy realms. The magisterial son is no shrinking violet, but a world figure who will be immediately recognized for who he is and the authority he carries. There'll be no crucifying or killing him. This guy won't be so easy to be disposed of, and for all of us, he'll be bringing the inevitable days of judgment. So the magisterial son's arrival together with his 70 invisible Avenals marks the true end of a dispensation and his judgments. And yes, there will be judgments. So I don't like that either. The imminent arrival of the magisterial son is being advanced in a quite different quarter by a group of readers of the Urantia Book who've gathered over the last decade into what they've called the teaching mission as a subset of the larger worldwide community of readers. And the teaching mission was formed with a spontaneous and unexpected emergence of a group of discarnate teachers who speak through some of the more mediumistically adroit individuals among the groups who meet to discuss the book, along with a wealth of material communicated. Now, you can find some books on Amazon that are future channelings from these entities, and And I can only say when I read it, it didn't feel authentic. That was my own opinion. You need to check those out, and you can, but some of it's very dark, and they're saying that 2/3 of the planet will be killed off with a biological weapon, and this was being said before, to make way. So I don't quite know what that means, and so that's one of the reasons I don't like it. It maintains that midwayers or midway creatures, as they are generally known, draw their existence, as their names suggest, between angelic dimensions, and the midwayers may be considered more permanent planetary citizens because many of them have been here since they were created almost 500,000 years ago. And because they remain undetectable to human senses, they function like angelic shock troops, available for interacting with human reality when absolutely necessary. According to Urantia, there are 7 super universes, which together compose the material multiverse. These 7 super universes form the substance of the finite multiverse, and the circle, the central of the universe, which can be visualized as the hole in the center of a toroidal form of the multiverse. And each super universe contains 100,000 local universes, which was indicated by Melchizedek in his movie 2012, where he's talking about the prophecies of 2012. He indicates the 100,000 local universes, each of which has its own creator son. Just like our Jesus Christ that was here was a creator son and its own divine mother. These are the creator beings of their domain. This pair of high beings modulate the energy downstepped from the central universe to create and form the beings and the planetary biospheres in the local universes. Each local universe sustains 10 million inhabited planets divided into 10,000 local systems. Each local system in turn contains 1,000 inhabited or to be inhabited planets, and each has its own system sovereign. Ours was Lucifer, appointed to govern the system, and each planet has a planetary prince. Ours was Prince Caligastia, who oversees the particular worlds. According to the Urantia Book, Lucifer and Satan came to believe that an elaborate conspiracy had been concocted by the creator sons of the local universes. I don't know what that means. Perhaps they were saying they're questioning the existence of God within a God-created system. Some of the really wonderful things are the beginnings, where they talk about the creation of the universe and the mansion worlds, which was the question that was asked of Abraham. The woman said the idea of the mansion world she wanted to accept into her vortex. And I cannot even begin with this podcast, with what we've talked about so far, to talk about all of these particular issues. But I can go over some of them to give a basic idea. It talks about going through an ascendant journey where you start on Urantia, and then Jerusalem is the headquarters of our local system, and Satania, 7 major spheres around Jerusalem, each with 7 satellites. And then we go to Urantia, which is the headquarters of the Melchizedek constellation, and 70 major spheres around Urantia, each with 10 satellites and 771 spheres in total. These are these massive star systems with planets circling around themselves in perfect precision. And many of these planetary systems are blocked on purpose from the rest of the universe. They can't be seen with telescopes. They even cover that. There is a central universe or central part of the universe that never moves, the only unmoving part, which is called paradise, from which God is living, and it is in paradise. There's an actual physical location for this paradise. So then they talk about things like the thought adjuster, which is interesting. It's implied in the book that a thought adjuster comes directly from paradise and from God, and it ends up in your body. And sometimes they can leave for short periods of time, but generally they stay with you the whole time. It's very much like Neville Goddard describes God as being lodged in your mind, following your every thought. And then when you advance and ascend, there's a point where you fuse with this thought adjuster, who is essentially a piece of God, a fractal of God, and that is described in the Law of One as we fuse with our higher self at 6.5 density, the higher self being the thought adjuster. What's interesting, in the mythology of Neville Goddard, he talks about fusing, this fusion that happens when he realized that he was God. And in the Urantia book, they talk about a fusion happening. There's so many other terms, Urantia and the Mansion worlds and the Finalitier world and Spernagia and the constellation and the Adentia and the 7 circuits of Havona, which we could talk about the aspects of Havona and the children of eternity and the description of paradise. It's mind-blowing. The idea is there's this gigantic bureaucratic network and perfectly precise universe that's been created, and there is a veil, a facade behind it all, and at the very center of it all, they are creating in several different systems. And you got to think, if there is one God and there is a system, as we've seen, there's these federations, and there probably is a framework for how they're created. And maybe there's something behind the veil, and this appeals to me in that particular case. There are these Melchizedek worlds that are described that you go to as a part of an educational process. And the Urantia talks about us going through Earth like a classroom, which appeals to me. We're in this classroom and we're moving up and ascending as we learn about these things. So I would love to get your thoughts on Urantia. They talk about Jesus and what happens in those years and his teachings, and it's very interesting, well written. The thing to remember about Urantia is that there are multiple authors, and Sadler, who had written about this, puts these authors in the table of contents at the beginning. Now, of course, there is doubters out there. There's some really popular books that have been read that I recommend. If you want to look at the opposition to this, is Martin Gardner's book, Urantia, the Great Cult Mystery. In that particular book, he describes it as a cult and tries to undermine some of the science behind it. And there are some flaws in the Urantia science, one of them being that Mercury doesn't rotate, that it stays fixed, and it doesn't. There's a couple minor mistakes in this, so obviously it's possible some of the different authors might have not been channeled properly, or could be incorrect, or all of it could be incorrect. But it's so fascinating to think about the Orvonton system, or the Ensa and the Splandon, these wonderful terms that come out of this. So, for instance, Havona is a spiritually perfect and physical stable universe, the haven of evolutionary spirits. Havona did not grow. It is and always has been exquisitely perfect, like the everlasting gods who are its source. The billion worlds of Havona are arranged in 7 concentric circuits immediately surrounding the 3 circuits of paradise satellites. There are upwards of 35 million worlds in the innermost Havona circuit, over 245 million in the outermost, with proportionate numbers intervening. Each circuit differs, but all are perfectly balanced and exquisitely organized, and each is pervaded by a specialized representation of the infinite spirit, one of the 7 spirits of the circuits. In addition to the other function, this impersonal spirit coordinates the conduct of celestial affairs throughout each circuit. In time, the worlds of each circuit follow each other in orderly linear procession. Each Havona world has its own local time, and all worlds in the same circuit have the same length of year. The lengths of the year decreases from the outer to the innermost circuit as they swing around paradise at different rates. Besides Havona circuit time, there's also the Paradise Havona Standard Day and other time designations. The Standard Day is devised on the time taken for the inner circuit of worlds to complete one revolution around the Isle of Paradise, which requires about 1,000 Urantia years, which is also the standard time measurement for the 7 super universes, although each has its own internal time standards. So they talk about things like time and how it's measured on these other worlds. There's a really fascinating chapter in Urantia where they had asked about another planet that's similar to ours, and they go through all of the specific details of this other planet. So like I said, if this is science fiction, some of it's really well thought out. There's aspects of Uversa, which is interesting, where they talk about the 7 master spirits and the Havona servitals and the perfecters of wisdom and the divine counselors. There is the pilgrims of time, the Havona pilgrims. There's so many cool concepts that come from this. The destiny guardians. And just imagine as you evolve and move to higher worlds that some of them are so advanced. Maybe it's just so advanced technology that they've created their own solar systems that are so amazing, that have such perfect precision, and with so many planets in perfect precision, and they're like clockwork is kind of how you can imagine it. So, and then they talk about what it's like to become a thought adjuster and a finalizer and all these different positions and spiritual positions that we have. But I find it so interesting that all of the stuff that Melchizedek says is all confirming the information that's located in Urantia. I would certainly be willing to read some of these papers, or at least aspects of these papers. For this is how it begins. It talks about the Universal Father. The Universal Father is the God of all creation, the first source and center of all things and beings. First think of God as a creator, then as a controller, and lastly as an infinite upholder. The truth about the Universal Father had begun to dawn upon mankind when the prophet said, "You, God, are alone. There is none beside you. You have created the heaven and the heaven of the heavens and all of their hosts. You preserve and control them by the sons of God, where the universe is made." The Creator covers himself with light as with a garment and stretches out the heavens as a curtain. Only the concept of the Universal Father, one God in the place of many gods, enabled mortal man to comprehend the Father as divine creator and infinite controller. The myriads of planetary systems were all made to be eventually inhabited by many different types of intelligent creatures, beings who could know God, receive the divine affection, and love him in return. The universe of universes is the work of God and the dwelling place of his diverse creatures. God created the heavens and formed the earth. He established the universes and created this world not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. The enlightened worlds all recognize and worship the Universal Father, the eternal maker and infinite upholder of all creation. The will creatures of universe upon universe have embarked upon the long paradise journey, the fascinating struggle of the eternal adventure of attaining God the Father. The transcendent goal of the children of time is to find the eternal God, to comprehend the divine nature, to recognize the Universal Father. God-knowing creatures have only one supreme ambition, just one consuming desire, and that is to become, as they are in their spheres, like him, as he is in his paradise perfection of personality, in his universal sphere of righteous supremacy. From the Universal Father who inhabits eternity, there has gone forth the supreme mandate: be you perfect, even as I am perfect. In love and mercy, the messengers of paradise have carried this divine exhortation down through the ages and out throughout the universes, even to such lowly animal origin creatures as the human races of Urantia. This magnificent and universal injunction to strive for the attainment of the perfection of divinity is the first duty, and should be the highest ambition of all the struggling creatures' creation of the God of perfection. This possibility of the attainment of divine perfection is the final and certain destiny of all man's eternal spiritual progress. Urantia models can hardly hope to be perfect in the infinite sense, but it is entirely possible for human beings starting out as they do on this planet to attain the supernal and divine goal which the infinite God has set for mortal man. And when they do achieve this destiny, they will, in all that pertains to self-realization and mind attainment, be just as replete in their sphere of divine perfection as God himself is in his sphere of infinity and eternity. Such perfection may not be universal in the material sense, unlimited in intellectual grasp, or finally in spiritual experience, but it is final and complete in all finite aspects of divinity of will, perfection of personality motivation, and God consciousness. So it ends by saying, this is the true meaning of that divine command, be you perfect even as I am perfect, whichever urges mortal man onward and beckons him inward in that long and fascinating struggle for the attainment of higher and higher levels of spiritual values and true universe meanings. This sublime search for the God of universes is the supreme adventure of the inhabitants of all the worlds of time and space. And that's not even the first page of this book. So it goes on, and it will tell you all the questions that you might have. Now, the questions might not be accurate. And sometimes you do wonder if there is a subversive reason for the creation of a book, if this is not made by entities from outside of the earth, and why the entities from the outside of the earth would not say this is not true. So I will leave that for you to judge. And I could certainly talk about some of these concepts further. I'd like to know what you think about the rebellion as it's described in Urantia. But I still don't understand it all. I am not an expert, and I couldn't begin to explain many parts of it. But that's my thoughts on Urantia. And what are yours? All episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.